The White House National Security Council is the principal forum used by the President of the United States for consideration of national security and foreign policy matters with senior national security advisors and cabinet officials, and is part of the executive office of the President of the United States. Since its inception under Harry S. Truman, the function of the Council has been to advise and assist the President on national security and foreign policies. The Council also serves as the President's principal arm for coordinating these policies among various government agencies. The Council has counterparts in the National Security Councils of many other nations. History. The National Security Council was created in 1947 by the National Security Act. It was created because policymakers felt that the diplomacy of the State Department was no longer adequate to contain the USSR in light of the tension between the Soviet Union and the United States. The intent was to ensure coordination and concurrence among the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force and other instruments of national security policy such as the Central Intelligence Agency, also created in the National Security Act. On May 26, 2009, President Barack Obama merged the White House staff supporting the Homeland Security Council and the National Security Council into one national security staff. The HSC and NSC each continue to exist by statute as bodies supporting the President. The decision process inside the structure has become less and less formal, but influence of the Council has become stronger and stronger. Detailed history of the National Security Council under each presidential administration since its inception can be found at 1993 present. Membership. The National Security Council is chaired by the President. Its members are the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Energy, the National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of the Treasury. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is the statutory military advisor to the Council. The Director of National Intelligence is the statutory intelligence advisor, and the Director of National Drug Control Policy is the statutory drug control policy advisor. The Chief of Staff to the President, Counsel to the President, and the Assistant to the President for Economic Policy are also regularly invited to attend NSC meetings. The Attorney General, the Director of the Office of Management and Budget and the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency are invited to attend meetings pertaining to the responsibilities. The heads of other executive departments and agencies, as well as other senior officials, are invited to attend meetings of the NSC when appropriate. Staff Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs, Susan Rice. Assistant to the President and Deputy National Security Advisor, Avril Haines. Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communications and Speechwriting, Ben Rhodes. Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economic Affairs, Adwale Adamo. Deputy Assistant to the President, Executive Secretary of the National Security Council and Chief of Staff, Susie George. Deputy Assistant to the President, Deputy White House Counsel, and Legal Advisor to the National Security Council, Brian Egan. Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Strategic Planning, Salman Ahmed. Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Counterterrorism, Jen Easterly. Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Defense Policy and Strategy, Troy Thomas. Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for International Economics, Rory McFarker. Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Weapons of Mass Destruction, Terrorism and Threat Reduction, Laura S. H. Holgate. Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights, Rights, Stephen Pomper, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Development and Democracy; Mary Beth Goodman, Special Assistant to the President and Cybersecurity Coordinator; Michael Daniel, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Non-Proliferation; Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Intelligence Programs; Brett Holmgren, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Energy and Climate Change; Paul Bodnar, Special Assistant to the President and White House Coordinator for the Middle East, North Africa, and the Gulf region; Rob Malley, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Gulf States; Jeffrey Prescott, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Israel, Egypt, and the Levant; Yael Lempert, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for North Africa and Yemen, Eric Pawlowski, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for African Affairs, Grant E. Harris, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Western Hemisphere Affairs, Mark Firestein, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Europe, Charlie Kupchan, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Russia and Central Asia, Celeste Wallander, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for the Central Region, Dennis Ross, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for South Asia, Peter Lavoie, Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Asia, Dan Crittenbring. Authority. The National Security Council was established by the National Security Act of 1947, amended by the National Security Act Amendments of 1949. Later in 1949, as part of the reorganization plan, the Council was placed in the Executive Office of the President. High-Value Detainee Interrogation Group. The High-Value Detainee Interrogation Group reports to the NSC. Kill authorizations. A secret National Security Council panel may pursue the killing of an individual who has been called a suspected terrorist. In this case, no public record of this decision or any operation to kill the suspect will be made available. No laws govern criteria for killing such suspects, nor mandate the existence of the panel. National Security Advisor Susan Rice, who has helped codify targeted killing criteria by creating the Disposition Matrix database, has described the Obama administration targeted killing policy by stating that in order to ensure that our counter-terrorism operations involving the use of lethal force are legal, ethical, and wise, President Obama has demanded that we hold ourselves to the highest possible standards and processes. It is unknown who has been placed on the kill list. Mark Hosenball, a Reuters reporter, alleges Anwar al-Awlaki was on the list. On February 4, 2013, NBC published a leaked Department of Justice memo providing a summary of the rationale used to justify targeted killing of U.S. citizens who are senior operational leaders of Al-Qaeda or associated forces.